leading Leave campaigner, the Conservative MP John Redwood. Mr Redwood, a very good morning to you. Daily Telegraph today suggesting that some French diplomatic sources are expressing disquiet about the pace of progress.
Well, I'm glad they are, because if I were representing the EU, I'd be quite worried by the way their negotiators have been fairly dilatory, have made lots of objections to British proposals, but haven't come up with any positive ways forward to protect their trade and to preserve their access to the very lucrative UK market. So I can quite understand why French and German business people and probably some of their governments now are getting a bit nervous.
Yeah, in a sense, they're locked into this sequencing idea. In other words, we don't deal with those three key areas, we can't move on and talk about things like trade. But there's an emerging sense in which the two things may at times be interlocked. The example that's increasingly given is what's happening, or what would happen in the future with the Northern Irish border. You can't really talk about the arrangements that you would have on the border until, for instance, you know what the customs union arrangements would be. So doing one before the other becomes very difficult indeed.
Well, that's right. I mean, the main border discussion is, are there going to be tariffs or are there not going to be tariffs, and can we carry on with the current free access that we're recommending? And on the big issue of the so-called settlement, I hope we can get that out of the way very quickly. It seems to me very easy. The UK doesn't owe them anything. The treaties make no provision for making a leaving present to the EU when you go, just as we didn't get a welcome present when we arrived. And we've always said that we'll pay our net contributions in the normal way, owing up to the point of departure, so I don't really see what there is to talk about.
Yeah. Are you seriously contending that we could get away with paying nothing as the price for leaving the European Union?
Yeah, there should be no price for leaving the European Union. It's a voluntary association of free states and democracies. Our democracy has voted to leave. There is no penalty clause in the treaties. We helped draft the treaty over exit. There was no provision for sending us an extra bill. And so I would propose we don't pay one. And the sooner the rest of the EU wakes up to that, the sooner we can get on with dealing with the really important things about how we are very positive and enthusiastic and friendly, wanting a bigger and better relationship in many ways when we've left. What we didn't like was the bills and them telling us what laws we had to impose. But when it comes to trade, mutual exchange, mutual investment, scholarship, universities, students' movements, all those kind of things, we're extremely positive, and we'd like to get on and nail down any detail that governments do need to be involved in.
I'm sorry to labour this point to a tedious degree, but there are debts and obligations going forward, aren't there? And, I mean, just to give one example, you know, thousands of EU workers, civil servants, who will have pensions that there's an expectation that we would pay into for decades to come. That's just one small example of the types of obligations you have in the future that require a divorce settlement now.
Well, I don't agree with that. When you leave an institution, you've paid your bills up to the date of leaving, and those who carry on with the institution have continuing obligations to the staff. And if there is any shortfall on the pensions because they haven't funded them properly during our period of membership, that also will fall to those who carry on in the organisation. But they should have been funding those things as they went along in the normal way.
Labour's shift in position, it's been described as some as a much softer version of Brexit they're advocating. Other people talking about a division that they're presenting between retaining membership of an economic EU whilst leaving a political EU. Politically, does it concern you perhaps that might have broad appeal?
No, I don't think it has broad appeal at all. I think the leadership has been very weak and has given in to this rather extreme pressure group in the Blairite wing of the party who doesn't want us to leave the EU at all. Now, the leadership always agreed with us that if you leave the EU, you leave the single market and the customs union. And indeed, this Parliament, after the general election, had a very important vote called by a rebel Blairite Labour MP to get us to stay in the customs union or single market, and it was decisively voted down by this Parliament by a big majority, and the Labour leadership didn't support the rebel MP. I don't know why they changed their mind, because they have an awful lot of Leave voters who will be particularly upset about this change of heart. But you also have to ask, how democratic are they? Because both the Leave and the Remain sides made it clear to the British people during the referendum that we would be leaving the single market when we left the EU, and that is an honest statement of the position.
John Redwood, thanks very much. It's time for our weekly...
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.